A family's van vanished without a trace on Christmas Eve, 1990. Then in 2024, a plumber discovered it sealed behind a brick wall in an abandoned tunnel. Inside was a gift with today's date. Still warm. What happens next will leave you speechless. A vanished van, a sealed tunnel, and a gift that's still warm. What could it mean? Subscribe and join the hunt for answers. You don't want to miss what's next. The December wind bit through Tariq Mahmoud's threadbare jacket, a cruel echo of the cold emptiness that had settled in his life 34 years ago. It whipped around him in Gulshan-Iqbal Park, tugging at the loose threads of his scarf, carrying the faint, metallic tang of an impending rain, and whispering through the skeletal branches of the old trees. He stood by the rusted swing set, its chains creaking mournfully, a ghost of laughter in the air that only he could hear. This swing set, this park, this exact spot, it was here on Christmas Eve of 1990 that he last saw his father, his younger brother, and their navy blue minivan. The image, burned into his memory, was as vivid and painful now as it had been that frigid night. The van's taillights receding into the swirling fog, swallowed by the indifferent darkness. 34 years. 34 years of unanswered questions, of sleepless nights, of a silence so profound it had become a physical weight in his chest. The official investigation, a flurry of activity that quickly dwindled to nothing, had long gone cold, filed away as an unsolved missing persons case. But for Tariq, now a man in his late 30s with worry etched deep around his eyes and a perpetual stoop to his shoulders, the passage of time had done little to dull the ache of uncertainty. If anything, it had sharpened it, honing it into a constant, gnawing pain. His objective, the singular driving force behind his existence for over 3 decades, remained unchanged, a quiet desperation that vibrated beneath his skin, to find out what happened to his family. The void they left permeated every aspect of his life, a silent, gaping maw that consumed joy, hope, and peace. It was a constant, brutal reminder of a past shrouded in impenetrable mystery. Beneath his outwardly stoic demeanor, a front he had perfected over years of enduring sympathetic glances and platitudes, lay a corrosive guilt. A childish argument, a petty squabble with his younger brother that Christmas Eve, replayed endlessly in his mind, each word a searing brand. If only I hadn't said that. If only I had gone with them. The what-ifs were a relentless tormentor, their whispers louder than any wind. The tension within him was a tightly wound spring, stretched taut over countless dead ends and the slow, agonizing erosion of hope. It was ready to snap at the slightest provocation, fueled by the frustration of fruitless searches and the despair of abandoned leads. He had chased every whisper, every fleeting shadow, only to find himself back in the same desolate place, staring into the same abyss of the unknown. His apartment, once a vibrant family home, was now a mausoleum of memories, each object a painful relic. His work, demanding and meticulous, served as a mere distraction, a way to fill the hours until he could resume his solitary, desperate quest. Today, however, felt different. A tremor, a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the suffocating stillness, had stirred something within him. The call had come earlier this morning, pulling him from a restless sleep. It was from Imran, an old family friend, a plumber he'd known since childhood. Imran was working on a demolition project near the abandoned Karachi Northern Bypass, a forgotten stretch of road that snaked through the city's industrial outskirts. The friend's voice had been hesitant, a strange mix of excitement and unease. He described finding something unusual, a section of an old tunnel, sealed off by a seemingly recently constructed brick wall. Tariq had gripped the phone, his knuckles white. He'd heard countless false leads, dozens of theories, but something about Imran's hesitant tone, the specificity of his description, resonated deep within him. And then came the detail that truly sparked a flicker of something Tariq hadn't felt in years, a sliver of possibility. Imran had mentioned a faint, metallic blue paint fleck found near the unusual wall. Navy blue, like their minivan. The connection, though tenuous, sent a jolt through him, a jolt that was terrifying in its intensity. He knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that he had to see it. He had to feel it. He had to know. The cold wind bit harder, but Tarek barely noticed. His eyes, usually clouded with sorrow, held a new, burning light. "I have to go see it for myself," Tarek murmured, the words a silent promise to the ghosts of his past. The chill inside the restricted zone of the old tunnel bit harder than the December wind outside. Imran, a man whose hands were usually steady from years of plumbing, found them trembling slightly as he stood before the makeshift barricade. His gaze lingered on the collapsed section, then darted to the ominous brick wall that sealed off a segment of the ancient passage. A musty, unsettling odor hung heavy in the damp air, a scent that prickled the back of his nose and settled uncomfortably in his chest. His foreman's instructions echoed in his mind. Demolish the area, clear the way. Simple enough, yet the discovery of this meticulously sealed-off tunnel had twisted his professional duty into something far more personal. Loyalty, thick and unyielding, was the anchor that had rooted him here, overriding the practical concerns of his job. Tarek Mahmoud, his childhood neighbor, his friend, had been haunted for decades by the disappearance of his father and younger brother. Imran remembered the navy blue minivan, not as a missing persons case file, but as a vibrant symbol of family joy, weekend trips to Clifton Beach, laughter spilling from its windows during countless family outings. That van, that lost family, had been a constant, quiet sorrow in Tarek's eyes, a sorrow Imran had carried a piece of himself. Beneath his outwardly calm demeanor, a gnawing unease churned. He told himself it was just an old, forgotten part of the city's infrastructure, a relic of abandoned plans. But the fresh appearance of the bricks, the mortar that still hadn't fully cured in places, defied logic. Felt wrong. The silence of the deserted bypass amplified the palpable tension in the air, a heavy blanket pressed down by the weight of the unknown behind that solid brickwork. He tried to rationalize it away, a renovation, perhaps, but the faint draft seeping from a hairline crack in the wall, carrying with it a peculiar, almost sickly sweetness he couldn't quite place, argued against any mundane explanation. It was a sweetness that hinted at something artificial, something deliberately concealed. He thought of Tarek again, of the quiet desperation that had etched lines around his eyes over 34 years. Imran had watched his friend chase countless dead ends, each one deepening the ache of uncertainty. Now, this unexpected discovery, this tangible anomaly, felt like a perverse echo from the past, demanding attention. He couldn't just walk away. The foreman could wait. Tarek couldn't. The image of Tarek's perpetually sad eyes nagged at him, a silent plea for answers that transcended the practicalities of a demolition job. He had called Tarek immediately, his voice hushed with a mixture of apprehension and a strange, burgeoning hope. He recounted the details, the newness of the bricks, the uncured mortar, the faint blue paint fleck near the wall that seemed to shimmer under his flashlight beam. He described the unsettling draft, the sweet, unidentifiable scent. He gestured towards the solid brickwork, a silent testament to a secret held for over 3 decades. "It just felt wrong, Tarek," Imran repeated, his voice low and troubled. The aging sedan idled, its engine a low grumble against the pervasive silence of the abandoned Karachi northern bypass. Faisal, a man whose retired police officer's posture still spoke of vigilance, leaned against its worn flank, his gaze laser-focused on the crudely sealed tunnel entrance. His objective was clear, to stand by his cousin, Tarek, through yet another potentially futile lead, but also to temper the fragile hope that flickered in Tarek's eyes, a hope that had been cruelly extinguished countless times over the past 34 years. A phantom ache resonated in Faisal's chest, a sympathetic echo of Tarek's enduring pain. He remembered the initial, frantic searches of 1990, the endless dead ends, the gnawing feeling of failure that had settled deep within him. Yet, beneath his practiced veneer of skepticism, a flicker of something else ignited a professional curiosity, a trained instinct that recognized the unusual. Imran's breathless account of fresh brickwork sealing an old tunnel, a detail so out of place, kept nagging at him. He pushed off the car, his movements deliberate, and approached the sealed wall. The air here was heavy, carrying the faint, unsettling must of damp earth and disuse, but overlaid with a peculiar sweetness, subtle yet persistent, that Imran had mentioned. Faisal extended a gloved hand, running it cautiously over the rough, uneven surface of the bricks. The coolness beneath his touch was immediate, and the mortar, surprisingly firm, felt far from the crumbling, ancient decay he would expect from a structure sealed for decades. His eyes, honed by years of police work, scanned the surface. A slight discoloration, almost imperceptible, shimmered on some of the bricks, a faint blue tinge that eerily mirrored Imran's earlier, hesitant observation of metallic blue paint flecks. "It just doesn't add up," Faisal murmured, more to himself than to Tariq, who stood a few feet away, his face a mask of desperate anticipation. Tariq's silence was a heavy weight, a testament to the emotional toll of 3 decades spent chasing ghosts. Faisal remembered the countless tips they had chased, the false dawns, the crushing disappointments that had hardened Tariq's spirit but never quite extinguished his desperate need to know. He felt the tension emanating from his cousin, a tightly coiled spring of hope and despair. He needed to ground Tariq to protect him from another fall. He turned to face Tariq, his voice firm, though a subtle thread of concern was woven into his tone. "We need to be realistic, Tariq," Faisal said, his gaze steady. "But this is certainly something we need to look into further." The deepening twilight painted the desolate expanse of the Karachi Northern Bypass in hues of bruised purple and charcoal gray, casting long, wavering shadows from the skeletal remains of forgotten infrastructure. 3 figures stood silhouetted against this fading light, their breaths puffing out in white clouds against the biting December wind that offered no warmth, only a constant, chilling reminder of the cold mystery before them. The brick wall, crude and out of place in the derelict tunnel, loomed like an ancient, unyielding sentinel, a silent testament to a truth frozen in time. For Tariq, his objective was a singular, burning ember in the vast darkness of his grief. To breach this wall and finally uncover what lay hidden within. The emotional stakes clawed at his throat, a volatile mixture of terror and a terrifying elation. For 34 years, the void left by his father and younger brother's disappearance had consumed him, a constant, gnawing uncertainty. Now, the prospect of learning the truth, no matter how devastating, churned a maelstrom of emotions within his chest. Beneath his anxious anticipation, a fragile sliver of hope, persistent against all odds, whispered of closure. It was a faint, almost imperceptible murmur against the roaring silence of decades, promising an end to the ceaseless torment. The tension in the air was a living entity, thick and suffocating, broken only by the distant, almost ghostly hum of traffic from the functioning section of the bypass, a world oblivious to the raw human drama unfolding beneath its feet. Imran, the plumber, a man whose hands were accustomed to the precise work of pipes and fittings, nervously fiddled with the heavy tools slung over his shoulder, his eyes darting between the wall and Tariq's resolute profile. His face, usually a map of geniality, was etched with a nervous apprehension. He cleared his throat, a small, rasping sound swallowed by the vastness of the tunnel. Faisal, Tariq's cousin and a retired police officer, stood a little apart, his gaze fixed on the anomaly of the sealed tunnel. The lines around his eyes were not merely from age but from years of bearing witness to human suffering, of chasing ghosts and finding only echoes. He had been part of the initial, fruitless search in 1990, and the weight of that failure, the unsolved case, had never truly lifted. His call for discreet assistance moments ago hung unspoken in the air between them, a testament to the strange gravity of the situation, a professional caution battling a deep-seated familial duty. He watched Tariq, a silent guardian against the potential unraveling of a mind stretched thin by decades of unanswered questions. He wanted to support his cousin, yes, but also to temper the fragile hope, to ensure Tariq didn't plunge headfirst into another abyss of disappointment. Tariq, oblivious to their internal struggles, reached out, his trembling hand brushing against the cold, rough surface of the bricks. A visceral wave of memories washed over him, swift and overwhelming. He saw his younger brother's bright, mischievous smile, heard the echo of their laughter, a joyous sound now muted by the passage of time. He felt the comforting, solid presence of his father beside him, the familiar scent of their old navy blue minivan, a scent that had long since faded from the world above ground. He imagined them trapped, lost, or worse, behind this very wall. The thought, a horrifying specter, sent a violent shiver down his spine, but instead of paralyzing him, it hardened his resolve, forging it into something unyielding. He turned, his eyes, dark pools of fear and fierce determination, sweeping over Imran, then settling on Faisal. The unspoken question hung heavy between them. He didn't need their permission, only their presence, their shared burden in this final, desperate act. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, thin and reedy against the vast, echoing silence of the tunnel. Yet it carried the unbreakable conviction of a man at the precipice of his life's defining moment. "We have to do this," Tariq said, the words hanging heavy in the twilight air. "We have to know." The rhythmic clang of the crowbar against hardened mortar resonated through the constricted air of the tunnel, each strike a sharp punctuation mark in the heavy silence. Imran, a man of quiet strength, his movements precise despite the crudeness of his tool, systematically chipped away at the stubborn brickwork. Dust, illuminated by the powerful beam of Faisal's flashlight, swirled in the narrow confines, clinging to their clothes and coating their tongues. Tariq and Faisal stood poised, their gazes fixed on the wall, their hearts a synchronized drumbeat of apprehension and burgeoning hope. For Tariq, this moment was the very nexus of his existence, the culmination of 34 agonizing years spent chasing shadows and whispers. His singular objective, a burning ember that had never extinguished, was to finally pierce the veil of uncertainty and confront whatever truth lay on the other side. This was everything. The potential end of a lifelong torment, a definitive answer to a question that had hollowed out a significant portion of his soul. Beneath Tariq's outwardly resolute demeanor, a profound dread coiled in his gut. The fear of what he might uncover was a cold, insistent whisper, the chilling confirmation of his most deeply buried nightmares, a final unyielding wall against any semblance of peace. The air in the small, enclosed tunnel pressed in on them, thick with anticipation and the fine, abrasive dust stirred by Imran's relentless effort. Every ragged breath Tariq took tasted of grit and impending revelation. Faisal, ever the pragmatist, kept a vigilant eye on the crumbling structure around them. His professional caution, honed by years in law enforcement, warred with the raw, personal stake he held in Tariq's quest. He assessed the precariousness of the old tunnel, ensuring that their desperate hunt for answers didn't inadvertently collapse into a new, more immediate tragedy. His powerful flashlight, held steady, cut through the gloom, its focused beam highlighting the crude, uneven nature of the brickwork. Here and there, a faint glint of something metallic, small and unrecognizable, was embedded within the ancient mortar, a testament to the passage of time or perhaps to an even older secret. "Careful, Imran," Faisal's voice rumbled, a low warning that barely penetrated Tariq's hyper-focused awareness. "We don't want this whole thing coming down on us." His words, though directed at the immediate danger, carried an unspoken weight, a shared understanding of the precariousness of their entire endeavor. Tariq, however, was deaf to the warning, blind to the dust and the potential collapse. His world had shrunk to the slowly widening gap in the wall, each falling brick a victory, each splinter of light through the deepening fissure a step closer to his fate. His breath hitched in his throat, a silent prayer to the wall itself, urging it to yield its secrets. "Just a little more," he whispered, the words almost a plea, hanging heavy in the dust-filled air, as if the inanimate bricks could hear his desperate yearning. The first few bricks groaned and tumbled inward, sending a cascade of ancient dust and fine grit swirling into the air. With their collapse, something new, something other, pushed out from the darkness beyond the crumbling barrier. It wasn't the expected damp, earthy scent of an old, forgotten tunnel. This was different. A distinct, sickly sweet odor emerged, cloying and heavy, carrying an unsettling mix of decay with something artificially pleasant, like a cheap air freshener trying to mask something foul. Imran, his brow furrowed, instinctively recoiled, his nose wrinkling in distaste. "What is that smell?" he muttered, taking a hesitant step back, his earlier nervous energy replaced by an obvious unease. The stench seemed to cling to the air, an invisible, unwelcome guest that had suddenly joined them in the stale confines of the old bypass tunnel. Tariq, however, felt an undeniable, almost magnetic pull. His initial apprehension, a constant companion since Imran's call, was now overridden by an intense, almost frantic curiosity. The scent, bizarre as it was, carried a strange, almost familiar quality, a phantom echo from a half-forgotten dream or a distant memory he couldn't quite grasp. His objective, initially focused on simply breaching the wall, had subtly but powerfully shifted. Now it was about identifying this strange, intrusive odor, understanding its impossible presence in a place sealed for decades. The emotional stakes, already immense, intensified with each breath he took of the peculiar air. The unknown had become immediate, tangible, and unsettlingly close. This bizarre scent felt like a clue in itself, a grotesque breadcrumb leading deeper into the mystery that had consumed 34 years of his life. Hidden beneath Tariq's almost desperate eagerness was a growing, icy unease, a chilling premonition that the answers they sought might be far more disturbing, far more grotesque, than he had ever allowed himself to imagine. The air thickened, not just with dust, but with an almost palpable sense of foreboding. Each beat of his heart seemed to amplify the tension, a drum roll leading to an unknown reveal. Faisal, ever the pragmatist, leaned forward, taking a deep, analytical sniff of the air, his professional curiosity warring with an instinctive caution. He frowned, processing the bizarre olfactory assault. "It's like old perfume," he mused, his voice low, then quickly corrected himself, a slight shudder passing through him. "No, more like some kind of air freshener, but mixed with something else. Something organic." The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. He raised his powerful flashlight, its focused beam cutting through the gloom and the swirling dust, directing it into the widening gap where the bricks had fallen. The light vanished, swallowed by an impenetrable black void. There was nothing to see, only the profound, consuming darkness that seemed to mock their efforts. Yet, the scent seemed to grow stronger, almost overpowering, making them feel lightheaded, a dizzying sensation that settled deep in their chests. "This is getting stranger by the minute," Faisal observed, his voice tinged with a professional curiosity that warred with his inherent caution, his eyes darting between the dark opening and Tariq's pale, resolute face. He could feel the tension, a tightly wound spring about to snap, coiling in the small space. The bizarre elements piling up, the recently laid bricks, the faint blue paint fleck, and now this inexplicable, sickly sweet odor, suggested a meticulously crafted secret, not a mere forgotten section of infrastructure. This wasn't just an old tunnel. It felt orchestrated, deliberate. "We need to be prepared for anything. Some mysteries refuse to stay buried. If you love unraveling secrets that defy time, hit subscribe now. This story is just beginning." With a final, desperate heave, Imran dislodged a large section of the brick wall. It crumbled inward, sending a cascade of ancient dust and loosened mortar echoing into the tunnel. The air, already heavy and musty, now thrummed with the sudden vacuum, pulling the sickly sweet odor from the void beyond the collapsed barrier and intensifying its cloying presence. The opening was now large enough, a jagged, dark maw in the solid earth, beckoning with the unknown. Tariq's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, weighty silence. His objective was immediate, primal, to enter that hidden space. 34 years of silent suffering, of gnawing uncertainty, of dreams haunted by vanishing taillights and an empty park swing, had condensed into this single, terrifying moment. This wasn't just a physical barrier falling. It felt like the final obstacle to a truth that had held his life hostage for decades. A terrifying blend of hope and fear churned within him. Hope for an answer, any answer, and fear of what that answer might reveal. Would it be empty? Would it confirm his worst nightmares? Beneath Tarek's outwardly brave exterior, a child's desperate longing twisted in his gut. He pictured his father's kind, reassuring smile, his younger brother's bright, mischievous eyes. Even if it was only to confirm their fate, to finally lay the ghosts to rest, he had to know. The tension in the small, enclosed tunnel was suffocating, thick with the weight of unanswered questions that stretched back to that fateful Christmas Eve. The air seemed to press in, making each breath a conscious effort, filling his lungs with that peculiar, sweet scent that both repulsed and drew him in with an unsettling familiarity. Faisal, ever the cautious anchor, grabbed Tarek's arm, his grip firm and grounding. "Wait, Tarek," he cautioned, his voice a low rumble, laced with concern. His eyes, usually so analytical, darted between the unstable edges of the newly formed opening and Tarek's rigid form. "Let me go first. We don't know what's in there. It could be unstable or anything." Faisal's professional training warred with his deep familial concern, and the uncertainty of the situation made his instincts scream for prudence. But Tarek shook his head, a slight, almost imperceptible tremor passing through his body. His eyes, wide and unblinking, remained fixed on the murky shadows that danced just beyond the opening, inviting and terrifying. "No, Faisal," he said, his voice strained but resolute, infused with a purpose that brooked no argument. "This is my family. This is my journey." The words were barely a whisper, yet they carried the immense weight of a life consumed by a singular quest. He couldn't be held back, not now, not when the precipice of truth was finally within reach. He took a deep, shaky breath, the strange, sweet smell filling his lungs, tasting of metallic undertones and something else, something cloying and indefinable. He gripped his heavy-duty flashlight, its powerful beam cutting a hesitant, trembling path into the absolute darkness beyond the newly formed opening. Each flicker of light seemed to swallow itself, plunging deeper into the unknown. As he edged forward, stepping over the debris and through the jagged portal, his reflection seemed to waver in the beam, a ghostly figure stepping into the maw of the unknown. The beam of Tarek's flashlight pierced the inky blackness, carving a hesitant path through the dust-laden air of the newly breached chamber. The light, a fragile spear against an overwhelming void, flickered, then settled, revealing a sight that instantly stole his breath and sent a wave of icy dread through his veins. There, shrouded in 34 years of dust and silence, stood a vehicle. Its once vibrant navy blue paint was now dull and faded, a ghostly echo of its former self. But there was no mistaking the familiar contours. The rounded lines, the distinctive grille, the slight dent near the rear bumper. It was unmistakably the Mahmoud family's minivan. It was parked perfectly, almost reverently, as if someone had intentionally driven it into this hidden chamber and carefully positioned it for an eternal display. A guttural sound, part gasp, part sob, escaped Tarek's throat. His objective, pursued with a quiet, desperate fervor for over 3 decades, had just been fulfilled in the most shocking way possible. The van was here, but with this impossible confirmation, new, more terrifying questions immediately surfaced, clawing at the fragile edifice of his sanity. How? Why? The emotional stakes skyrocketed, rocketing beyond mere hope or fear. Seeing the van was a brutal punch to the gut, confirming his worst nightmares but leaving the how and why chillingly unanswered. His mind reeled, a kaleidoscope of fragmented memories swirling. Family picnics, laughter echoing from the back seats, the comforting scent of his father's old cologne clinging to the upholstery. Now only dust and an oppressive silence remained. Hidden beneath his profound shock was a desperate, illogical hope. A sliver of delusion, fragile yet persistent, whispered that somehow, impossibly, his father and brother might still be there, a faint echo of their presence in the suffocating stillness. He half expected to see them, perhaps slumped over or even— No, he couldn't even allow his mind to go there. The air in the chamber was thick with the stench of decay and that pervasive, cloying sweetness that had haunted them since the first brick gave way. It clung to his tongue, a sickly, chemical perfume that seemed to mock the very idea of life. The tension was so thick it was almost suffocating, pressing in on him from all sides. Behind him, Faisal and Imran, peering over Tariq's shoulder through the narrow opening, gasped in unison. Their sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the tomb-like space, a testament to the profound shock that rippled through all three men. The sight of the van, a ghost from their shared past, was profoundly unsettling for them too, tearing through the years of unanswered questions. Imran, the usually boisterous plumber, looked pale, his eyes wide and fixed on the van as if hypnotized. Faisal, ever the pragmatist, swallowed hard, his face a mask of disbelief struggling with a dawning, professional dread. Tariq's trembling hand reached out, compelled by an irresistible force. His fingertips, rough from years of manual labor, brushed against the dusty, cold metal of the minivan's rear fender. The contact was surreal, a horrifying reunion with a relic of a past he had desperately tried to reclaim. He noticed a faint, unnatural shimmer on the surface of the van, something almost iridescent, like a thin, unseen film coating the dull paint. It caught the flashlight beam, scattering it into tiny, unnatural rainbows that danced on the dust. It's really here," Tariq whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief, the words barely audible in the tomb-like silence of the sealed chamber. Tariq's flashlight beam, a solitary sentinel against the encroaching inky blackness, danced nervously across the minivan's interior. First, it illuminated the passenger seats, their fabric a ghostly pallor beneath decades of dust, then swept to the dashboard, a relic of a bygone era. Finally, with a jolt that sent an icy tremor through his very core, it settled on a small, rectangular object nestled in the driver's seat. It was a gift, pristine and horrifyingly untouched by the grime and decay that clung to everything else in this subterranean tomb. The festive Christmas paper, though faded and brittle with age, was still vibrant enough to mock the grim reality of their discovery. A wave of nausea washed over Tariq, his objective now sickeningly clear. He had to approach that gift, to unravel its secrets, and in doing so, perhaps unravel the last threads of his own sanity. The emotional stakes were agonizingly high, a cruel twist of the knife in an already gaping wound. This unexpected detail, this relic of a joyous past preserved in a present horror, felt less like a clue and more like a deliberate, sadistic taunt. Deep within him, beneath the profound terror that threatened to engulf him, flickered a sliver of desperate denial. Perhaps this was an elaborate, twisted joke, a cruel prank designed to break him after 34 years of silent suffering. But even as the thought formed, it felt flimsy, incapable of standing against the sheer, oppressive weight of the reality before him. The tension in the confined space was unbearable, a silent scream of disbelief echoing in the musty air. It pressed in on him, suffocating him with the weight of unanswered questions and unbidden fears. From behind him, Faisal's voice cut through the suffocating silence, tight with a professional caution that wrestled with the surreal scene unfolding before them. "Tariq, don't touch anything," he warned, his tone firm, a desperate plea to hold back the inevitable. But Tariq was already moving, drawn by an irresistible, morbid curiosity that transcended all logic and reason. Each step towards the minivan was a struggle against an invisible current, a desperate wading through the molasses of time and dread. His breath hitched in his throat, each inhale a shallow, inadequate gasp of the stale air. As he neared the driver's side, his gaze, still guided by the trembling beam of his flashlight, caught on something else, something almost imperceptible. Near the dashboard, barely visible beneath a thick layer of dust, was a small, unassuming vent. It was a detail so mundane, yet in this context so utterly terrifying. From this vent, a faint, almost ethereal wisp of vapor seemed to rise, a shimmering distortion in the beam of his light. And with it, a strange, humid warmth emanated, defying the cold, musty air that permeated the rest of the tunnel. It was an anomaly, a blatant contradiction to the 34 years of abandonment this place represented. The hair on his arms prickled, a primal instinct screaming at him to retreat, to flee from this impossible warmth. But his feet remained rooted to the spot, his morbid curiosity, a powerful magnetic force, pulling him inexorably closer. His outstretched hand, guided by a will not entirely his own, reached for the gift. His fingertips brushed against the festive paper, and that's when he felt it, a faint, almost imperceptible warmth emanating from the package. It was a warmth that felt impossible, a warmth that defied the decades of cold, an intimate heat that hinted at a recent, disturbing presence. The realization slammed into him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs, leaving him gasping. His voice, when it finally emerged, was a ragged whisper, thin and broken, barely audible in the tomb-like silence of the chamber. "It's warm," Tarek choked out, the words catching in his throat. "The gift. It's still warm." The inexplicable warmth radiating from the wrapped gift on the minivan's driver's seat struck all three men with a paralyzing terror, dismantling any semblance of logic. Tarek, his fingers hovering inches above the festive paper, felt an irresistible, desperate urge to tear it open, to unearth the unholy truth promised by this impossible heat. His sole objective narrowed to this: unwrap the package and confront the grotesque reality it held. The emotional stakes for him were immeasurable. This wasn't merely a cold case anymore, but something terrifyingly, actively alive, pulsating with an unnatural energy. Beneath his initial shock, a horrifying comprehension began to dawn. This was far more sinister than a simple accident or disappearance. The tension in the cramped chamber reached its zenith, every nerve in his body screaming a silent alarm. Faisal, his face contorted by a primal fear he rarely showed, instinctively lunged forward, grabbing Tarek by the arm and yanking him back from the van. "Tarek, stop. This isn't right. This isn't normal," he commanded, his voice tight with an urgency that bordered on a plea. Imran, whose face had gone a sickly pale, stumbled backward, his hand trembling uncontrollably as he pointed a shaky finger at the small vent Tarek had noticed earlier near the dashboard. "Look," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper, a thin thread of sound against the suffocating silence. From the vent, now eerily distinct against the shadowed interior of the van, emanated not just warmth, but a thin, almost invisible stream of gas. It was from this insidious vapor that the sickly sweet scent seemed to originate, a potent, concentrated version of the cloying odor that had permeated the entire tunnel. The smell, initially baffling, now clung to the air, heavy and suffocating, wrapping around them like an invisible shroud. It was no longer merely a peculiar smell. It felt like a deliberate, horrifying presence. Faisal's mind, despite the escalating terror, began to race, pulling fragments of old knowledge from the dusty corners of his police academy lectures. Bizarre, isolated incidents, strange crime scenes that defied easy explanation, flashed before his eyes. The chilling possibility began to form, a terrifying hypothesis that connected the unseen gas, the miraculously preserved gift, and the eerie, impossible warmth emanating from within the vehicle. He remembered discussions of extreme measures taken to obscure or preserve, methods bordering on the macabre. His gaze flickered between the vent, the barely visible stream of gas, and the perfectly preserved gift. "Gas preservation," Faisal mumbled, the words feeling foreign and grotesque on his tongue, his voice barely audible above his own ragged breathing. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality, a dawning realization that punched him in the gut. This isn't just a sealed tunnel. It's a chamber. Faisal's mind, a whirlwind of fragmented facts and grim possibilities, connected the impossible warmth radiating from the wrapped gift, the unsettlingly sweet gas, and the perfectly preserved state of the minivan. His objective crystallized with a sickening clarity. He had to deduce the precise mechanism behind this macabre preservation and, more crucially, identify the insidious gas itself. The emotional stakes twisted his gut. This wasn't merely a missing persons case anymore, but the dawning horror of a truly grotesque crime, a chilling perversion of life and death, executed with cold, calculating precision. Hidden beneath his seasoned police officer's analytical facade was a profound horror at the implications, a dawning, terrifying understanding of a premeditated, long-term act of unimaginable cruelty. The tension in the small, enclosed chamber was no longer just anticipation, but a thick, cloying scientific dread. Each breath he took, though shallow, filled his lungs with that sickeningly sweet aroma, a scent that now felt less like a strange anomaly and more like a signature of the unseen perpetrator. Faisal moved with a cautious, almost surgical deliberation, his flashlight beam a steady spear through the oppressive gloom. He reached the small, barely perceptible vent near the minivan's dashboard, the one Tariq had initially noticed. Carefully, he extended the back of his gloved hand, testing the air. It was distinctly warm, an unnatural warmth that mimicked body temperature, despite the decades that had supposedly passed. His gaze followed a thin, almost invisible tube snaking away from the vent, disappearing into the darkness beneath the dashboard. He reached for a discarded piece of metallic debris on the dusty floor, a bent shard of what looked like an old fan blade, and carefully prodded the tube. To his professional astonishment, it felt surprisingly pliable, almost new, defying the 34 years of neglect that should have rendered it brittle and degraded. "This gas, it's being pumped in," Faisal stated, his voice a tight, guttural whisper, filled with a horrifying realization. He looked at Tariq, whose eyes were still fixed on the gift, a silent agony etched on his face. "And the warmth, it's part of the process. Something is keeping this fresh." The word fresh tasted like ash in his mouth, an utterly repulsive irony given the context. His gaze snapped back to the gift, still sitting unervingly untouched on the driver's seat, its festive paper a garish splash of color in the grim chamber. A sudden, terrifying thought struck him with the force of a physical blow, sending a cold shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the damp air. If the minivan itself was a deliberately controlled, artificially maintained environment, then what, or more chillingly, who might be inside? The implication was a macabre echo of the preservation he was deducing. The eerie silence of the chamber was broken only by Tariq's ragged, shallow breathing, a stark counterpoint to the distant, muffled, and utterly oblivious sounds of the world outside, the faint hum of traffic from the functioning part of the bypass, the muted calls of distant birds, mundane sounds from a reality entirely disconnected from the chilling tableau before them. His mind, trained for decades to dissect crime scenes and understand motive, could barely grasp the sheer, cold-blooded intent required to create such a horrifying display. The meticulousness, the long-term planning, the perverse dedication to this act. It spoke of an evil he had rarely encountered, even in his years as a police officer. This wasn't a desperate act of passion or a hurried concealment. This was a statement. "This is a trap," Faisal concluded, his voice barely a whisper, the weight of the words chilling them to the bone. A wave of icy clarity, sharp and brutal, washed over Tariq. Faisal's words, "This isn't just a sealed tunnel, it's a chamber," echoed in his mind, stripping away the last vestiges of desperate hope and replacing them with a chilling, undeniable truth. This wasn't an accident, a collapse, or a simple disappearance. This was deliberate. This was a prison, a tomb, meticulously crafted and maintained. His objective, which had been a desperate scramble for answers, now snapped into terrifying focus. Survival. He had to understand who could have perpetrated such an unimaginable act, and more urgently, he had to ensure his own safety and that of Imran and Faisal. A simmering rage began to churn beneath the cold fear, a desperate, primal need for justice against this unspeakable evil. The sweet, cloying scent, once a bizarre clue, now hung heavy in the air, transforming into the suffocating perfume of a death trap. Every breath felt tainted, every inhale a potential step closer to whatever macabre fate awaited them if they lingered. Faisal, his face grim, moved with a renewed urgency, his police instincts overriding the initial shock. His eyes, sharp and analytical, darted across the rough-hewn walls of the chamber, searching for any other hidden mechanisms, any other vents, any sign of an exit beyond the one they had just forced open. The beam of his powerful flashlight cut through the gloom, dancing over the uneven surfaces. He pointed abruptly to a section on the far wall, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, like a patch of distorted air. "Another vent," he murmured, his voice tight with a dreadful certainty. The chamber wasn't just sealed. It was designed for controlled airflow, a chilling testament to the premeditation of its architect. The implications were horrifying. Imran, who had been frozen in a tableau of terror, his face pale and his eyes wide, suddenly found a desperate, frantic burst of energy. He stumbled backward, away from the minivan, his hands scrabbling against the rough brickwork of the newly opened passage. "We need to get out of here. Now," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy with unadulterated panic, the words echoing back to them in the confined space. The reality of being trapped in a deliberately sealed chamber, potentially filled with a harmful, preserving gas, propelled him with a primal urge towards the opening. He didn't wait for a response, his movements jerky and uncoordinated as he tried to squeeze back through the narrow gap. Tariq, however, remained rooted to the spot for a fleeting moment, his gaze fixed on the navy blue minivan, a phantom from his past now horrifyingly real. The iridescent shimmer he had noticed earlier on its surface seemed to pulse faintly in the flashlight's beam, an unnatural sheen that spoke of the strange preservation at play. He felt the urgent pull of Imran's panic, the logical command to flee, but a morbid fascination held him captive. His eyes were drawn back to the gift on the driver's seat, the festive paper a grotesque parody of joy in this tomb. As he turned to follow Imran and Faisal, who was already urging Imran to move faster, Tariq caught one last, lingering glimpse of the package. It was then, in the periphery of his vision, that he noticed it. A small, almost imperceptible handwritten tag, tucked neatly beneath the ribbon. His breath hitched. He knew, with an unsettling certainty, that this was no random detail. This was a message, a direct communication from the unseen tormentor who had orchestrated this macabre scene. He took a hesitant step back towards the van, his mind screaming at him to run, but his feet refusing to obey. The tag, barely larger than his thumb, bore a single word, scrawled in an elegant, looping script that seemed eerily familiar, yet he couldn't place it. The word was, "Welcome." The word, a chilling mockery given the horrifying circumstances, seemed to throb with a sinister energy, a direct challenge from the unseen tormentor. "Welcome," Tariq repeated, his voice filled with a mixture of terror and dawning fury, the implication of the words striking him with devastating force. A wave of icy clarity, sharp and brutal, washed over Tariq. Faisal's words, "This isn't just a sealed tunnel, it's a chamber," echoed in his mind, stripping away the last vestiges of desperate hope and replacing them with a chilling, undeniable truth. This wasn't an accident, a collapse, or a simple disappearance. This was deliberate. This was a prison, a tomb, meticulously crafted and maintained. His objective, which had been a desperate scramble for answers, now snapped into terrifying focus. Survival. He had to understand who could have perpetrated such an unimaginable act, and more urgently, he had to ensure his own safety and that of Imran and Faisal. A simmering rage began to churn beneath the cold fear, a desperate, primal need for justice against this unspeakable evil. The sweet, cloying scent, once a bizarre clue, now hung heavy in the air, transforming into the suffocating perfume of a death trap. Every breath felt tainted, every inhale a potential step closer to whatever macabre fate awaited them if they lingered. Faisal, his face grim, moved with a renewed urgency, his police instincts overriding the initial shock. His eyes, sharp and analytical, darted across the rough-hewn walls of the chamber, searching for any other hidden mechanisms, any other vents, any sign of an exit beyond the one they had just forced open. The beam of his powerful flashlight cut through the gloom, dancing over the uneven surfaces. He pointed abruptly to a section on the far wall, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, like a patch of distorted air. "Another vent," he murmured, his voice tight with a dreadful certainty. The chamber wasn't just sealed. It was designed for controlled airflow, a chilling testament to the premeditation of its architect. The implications were horrifying. Imran, who had been frozen in a tableau of terror, his face pale and his eyes wide, suddenly found a desperate, frantic burst of energy. He stumbled backward, away from the minivan, his hands scrabbling against the rough brickwork of the newly opened passage. "We need to get out of here. Now," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy with unadulterated panic, the words echoing back to them in the confined space. The reality of being trapped in a deliberately sealed chamber, potentially filled with a harmful, preserving gas, propelled him with a primal urge towards the opening. He didn't wait for a response, his movements jerky and uncoordinated as he tried to squeeze back through the narrow gap. Tariq, however, remained rooted to the spot for a fleeting moment, his gaze fixed on the navy blue minivan, a phantom from his past now horrifyingly real. The iridescent shimmer he had noticed earlier on its surface seemed to pulse faintly in the flashlight's beam, an unnatural sheen that spoke of the strange preservation at play. He felt the urgent pull of Imran's panic, the logical command to flee, but a morbid fascination held him captive. His eyes were drawn back to the gift on the driver's seat, the festive paper a grotesque parody of joy in this tomb. As he turned to follow Imran and Faisal, who was already urging Imran to move faster, Tariq caught one last, lingering glimpse of the package. It was then, in the periphery of his vision, that he noticed it. A small, almost imperceptible handwritten tag, tucked neatly beneath the ribbon. His breath hitched. He knew, with an unsettling certainty, that this was no random detail. This was a message. A direct communication from the unseen tormentor who had orchestrated this macabre scene. He took a hesitant step back towards the van, his mind screaming at him to run, but his feet refusing to obey. The tag, barely larger than his thumb, bore a single word, scrawled in an elegant, looping script that seemed eerily familiar, yet he couldn't place it. The word was, "Welcome." The scramble out of the horrifying chamber was a blur of frantic movement and gasping breaths. Tariq stumbled back into the cooler, less oppressive air of the main tunnel, the metallic tang of the strange gas still clinging to his nostrils, its sickly sweetness a phantom taste on his tongue. The word "welcome" from the gift's tag echoed in his mind, a chilling whisper of malevolence. It was a taunt, he realized, a deliberate cruel jest from an unseen architect of their nightmare. His skin prickled with an unholy mix of terror and a consuming, burning rage. This wasn't just a discovery. It was a personal affront, a violation of his family's sacred memory. He felt a desperate, almost primal urge to re-enter the tomb, to rip apart the van and the gift, to find the twisted individual responsible for such an elaborate and macabre scene. His fear was immense, a cold hand gripping his heart, but it was overshadowed by a furious, desperate need for answers, for retribution against this unimaginable evil. "I'm calling this in. We need a full hazmat team. Forensics, everything," Faisal declared, his voice cutting through the ringing silence of the tunnel. He was already fumbling for his phone, his police instincts, dulled by years of retirement, now snapping back with an almost painful urgency. Tariq watched his cousin's hand tremble slightly as he navigated the keypad, the tremor a stark contrast to the firm resolve in his voice. The implications of what they had found were immense, stretching far beyond a simple missing persons case, twisting into something far more sinister and complex. Imran, however, offered no such resolve. His face was a mask of stark terror, eyes wide and fixed on the jagged opening where the brick wall had been. "I'm out. I'm not waiting around for whatever else is in there," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic, already half scrambling away from the chamber, his heavy plumber's tools clanking against the rough concrete floor of the tunnel. His boots pounded a hasty retreat, the echoes of his flight gradually fading into the distance, leaving Tariq and Faisal alone with the chilling remnants of their discovery. As Faisal spoke in low, urgent tones into his phone, relaying fragmented details of their find to a stunned authority on the other end, Tariq's gaze drifted back to the gaping maw of the chamber. His eyes were drawn inexorably to the minivan, to the driver's seat, and to the impossibly pristine Christmas gift resting there. The unsettling warmth of the package, a warmth that defied decades, was a magnet to his fractured senses. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. But amidst the chaos of his emotions, a sudden, cold certainty washed over him. The gift wasn't just a cruel taunt. It was a message, a clue, another piece of this grotesque puzzle. He felt it in his gut, a deep, unsettling premonition. The person who had meticulously crafted this scene would not leave a mere taunt without a deeper purpose. There had to be something more. He ignored Faisal's increasingly agitated voice as his cousin described the anomalous gas and the unexplained warmth. Tariq's focus narrowed, consumed by the singular conviction that the gift held another, crucial detail. His mind, usually clouded by grief, was now razor-sharp, cutting through the layers of shock and fear. The desire to know, to understand the depths of this depravity, was overwhelming. He knew, with an unsettling certainty, that the gift was more than just a cruel taunt. It held another piece of the puzzle, a critical clue he had to uncover. "There's more?" Tariq muttered, a chilling conviction in his voice, ignoring Faisal's frantic calls to the authorities. "There's something else inside that gift." The whirlwind began the moment Tariq stumbled from the tunnel, the sweet, cloying scent of the chamber still clinging to his clothes, an invisible shroud. Flashing blue and red lights painted the desolate landscape of the Karachi Northern Bypass, their frantic pulse mirroring the chaotic beat of his own heart. Masked figures in white hazmat suits moved with eerie precision, their faces obscured, their voices hushed, turning the horrific discovery into a sterile, procedural scene. Tariq stood apart, a bewildered outsider in his own nightmare. He'd answered questions until his throat was raw, recounted the impossible warmth of the gift, the insidious gas, the chilling welcome tag. They'd taken the gift, the music box, the photograph, the note. He had held nothing back, desperately hoping someone, anyone, could make sense of the monstrous tableau behind that newly breached wall. But even as he spoke, a gnawing emptiness settled in his gut, heavier than any fear. The world outside the cordon felt alien. The distant hum of traffic on the still-functioning part of the bypass was a stark contrast to the tomb-like silence of the chamber, a silence now filled with the professional murmurs of forensics and the metallic clink of their tools. He watched, numb, as a yellow tarpaulin was unfurled, obscuring the tunnel entrance, as if to erase the unspeakable truth within. The air, crisp and cold now, offered no comfort. The ghost of that sickly sweet smell lingered, a phantom limb of horror. He rubbed his temples, the lines of worry etched deeper around his eyes than ever before. 34 years. 34 years of searching, of chasing shadows, of imagining kidnappers and accidents and disappearances into the vast, indifferent city. Now the answer had emerged from the earth itself, more insidious, more profoundly personal than he could have ever conceived. He saw Faisal, his cousin, his steadfast rock, speaking intently into a phone, his face grim. Imran, the plumber whose innocent discovery had shattered Tariq's world, stood some distance away, pale and visibly trembling, his eyes wide and unfocused. Tariq wanted to approach them, to seek solace, to share the crushing weight, but the words wouldn't come. His mind kept replaying the scene. The dull navy blue of the van, the perfectly wrapped Christmas gift on the driver's seat, the impossible warmth, and then the small, elegant script of the welcome tag. It was a taunt, a twisted invitation, mocking his decades of anguish. Who could do this? Who could orchestrate such a prolonged, agonizing charade? The thought fueled a cold, quiet fury within him, a righteous anger that cut through the haze of shock. He remembered the childish argument, the one he'd had with his younger brother that Christmas Eve. A fleeting, insignificant spat that had ballooned into a mountain of guilt over the years. Now this was a direct assault on the very fabric of his memory, a desecration of his past. His gaze drifted to the now hidden opening, the makeshift barricade. He imagined the van inside, his father, his brother, preserved. The word itself was a perversion. Faisal's earlier deduction echoed in his mind. This is a trap. But for whom? And why? The closure he had sought felt like a mirage, replaced by a fresh, gaping wound. He felt a desperate need to tear down the tarpaulin, to re-enter, to demand answers from the silent, preserved scene. But the authorities had been firm. The gift, they explained, was key. It was evidence. He could not touch it again. Yet, a strange, undeniable conviction began to form in his mind. The gift, the music box, the photograph. It all felt carefully curated, a message specifically for him. It wasn't just a cruel taunt. It held another piece of the puzzle, a critical clue he had to uncover. He knew, with an unsettling certainty, that the gift was more than just a cruel taunt. It held another piece of the puzzle, a critical clue he had to uncover. When the past reaches into the present, only the brave listen. If you crave the truth behind the impossible, subscribe now. Together, we'll uncover every secret. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of mystery, time, and the unexplained, provoking curiosity about fate, loss, and unexpected hope. This narrative aims to inspire wonder, reflection, and a deeper appreciation for the unknown forces that shape our lives.